Our first after-lunch presenter is BANTAYEHU CHANIE, who comes to us from the Department of Political Science and International Studies at Bahir Dar University in Ethiopia. His research focuses on war and state formation in South Sudan, and here at Michigan he has worked with Professor Susan Page from the Ford School of Public Policy and the Law School. And BANTAYEHU will talk to us today about his research on the formation of one of Africa's and the world's newest states, South Sudan. BANTAYEHU.
Hello everyone, my name is BANTAYEHU. So I'm going to present my part of my research on that focus on war and state formation in South Sudan. My supervisor, my host here is Ambassador Page. So South Sudan became independent in July 2011 and joined the international system of states. And this was, South Sudan became independent after a prolonged struggle for self-determination by South Sudanese forces that dates back to the 1950s. So there were civil wars waged, two long civil wars waged by South Sudanese forces against Sudan's successive Sudanese government in Sudan. So when South Sudan became independent after referendum in July 2011, there was a great deal of exhilaration among South Sudanese that South Sudan became an independent state. But right after South Sudan became independent, it didn't take long for South Sudan to experience conflict and crisis coming from outside and inside. So scholars in peace and security studies and political science have been forwarding explanations for why South Sudan experiences a conflict that it tried to avoid by declaring independence from Sudan. So people talk about, for instance, tribalism is a factor, or power struggle among different groups in South Sudan is what really caused conflict. Some also talk about corruption. So although these things are true in South Sudan, I would argue that that doesn't sufficiently explain the conflict or the crisis in South Sudan. I believe that the crux of the matter it could only be explained by a comprehensive examination of the nature and the process of state formation in South Sudan that dates back to the 1950s, and also the state building that this newest state, the world's newest state, embarked on in 2011. So the objective of this research is to study the nature and the process of state formation in South Sudan and the state building project after the country declared independence in 2011. So I was motivated by the work of political sociologist Charles Tilly, who talked about war serving as an instrument of state making. Although war is a bad thing, but in medieval Europe, war used to serve as an instrument of state making, in the sense that in the process of war making developed some sort of centralization structure, institutions that political entities in a process develop the capacity to actually control certain areas, establish administrative apparatus, and develop the capacity to extract resources, etc., among other things. And this has been shared by a lot of other scholars. For Some people argue that, for instance, those who subscribe to Charles Tilly's idea argue that Africa missed out the opportunity of warfare that Europe experienced in the medieval era, that weak states were vanquished in Europe, and states that could survive came out to be states in Western Europe. But in Africa, because states have not gone through that protracted, very prolonged process of war making and developed the centralization and institution structure, are experiencing conflict, because states in Africa are just products of colonial engineering. So I was motivated by that. So I try to explain, because I believe that the problem in South Sudan has to do with the process of state formation. I try to explain the process of South Sudan state formation through the eyes of war, and also talked about the state building project that South Sudan embarked on after it declared independence in 2011 in relation to its past experience, and the machinery of government and social forces based on secondary literature as an aspect, a key components of state building, explaining the conflict that the state began to experience after it declared independence in 2011. So the process of state formation in South Sudan, or the war of self-determination that began in the 1950s, is very much incepted on the colonial rule in Sudan. South Sudan, as part of Sudan, had gone through a colonial rule that began in the early 19th century. Sudan was under the Turkey, under the Turco-Egyptian rule, beginning from 1820 all the way to 1881. And also Sudan after that, Sudan also was under the colonial of the Mahdists from 1881 all the way to 1898. And after that, also the British came and ruled Sudan until 1956. So the way these colonial rulers in Sudan ruled this country was not the same for the North and the South. The South although the colonial rule administered both Southern and Northern Sudan as part of Sudan, South Sudan's were subjects of discrimination, Islamization, enslavement, Arabization by these colonial rulers. So we cannot compare the impact of colonial rule in Sudan in the North and in the South. So particularly the British, because they faced strong resistance among Southern Sudanese, had completely abandoned Southern Sudanese in terms of building, administrative apparatus or infrastructure development, etc., etc. So when the era of decolonization began in the 1950s, and the British were about to transfer power to the locals, the northern elites who took over did not really engage Southern Sudanese to become part of that process of decolonization, that process of transfer of power from the British to the Sudanese. So what the northern elites in Sudan did was simply perpetuate what had happened to Southern Sudanese during the colonial era. So they were not highly represented in the process of decolonization, and right after independence in 1956, the northern elites completely dominated political and other aspects of Sudanese politics. So that greed of the northern elites and the grievance among Southern Sudanese later led to the beginning of civil war in Sudan. And the first civil war was broke out in 1955 by a group later known as Ania that continued until 1972 with the signing of what is known as the Addis Ababa Accord or the Addis Ababa Agreement. And also after a little brief period of peace in Sudan, after the signing of the 1972 agreement, Another civil war also broke out in 1983 and continued until 2005, and then concluded by the signing of the comprehensive peace agreement. So the point the reason why I'm trying to explain this war is because I was motivated by that idea that war contributes to state making, and if that really happened in South Sudan. So the nature of the war in the first civil war in Sudan, it was not, the war was not waged in a way that Charles Tilly talked about, that the rebels in southern Sudan were not able to control a certain part of area. They didn't have stable control, and they were not able to really establish some kind of structure under their governance. They were not able to develop the capacity to establish civilian administration. And rather than contributing to state making, what war did in southern Sudan in the first civil war was simply, it was devastating. It didn't really contribute to state making. And the peacetime from 1972 to 1983, although there was peace because of that agreement, again, the northern elites did not invest in southern Sudan that was very much underdeveloped. So the same thing happened from 1983, in the second civil war from 1983 all the way to 2005. Although the SPLM, this is a former rebel group, now the leading political group in Sudan, led by Salva Kiir, although it was much more sophisticated compared to the first group, the Anania, in terms of having some kind of ideology, even though that ideology is not as sophisticated as the ideology of other groups in the Horn of Africa, such as, for instance, EPLF in Eritrea or TPLF in Ethiopia. But they have some kind of ideology, particularly by the Garang, who led that movement, had some kind of ideological conviction. Organizationally also, they were also, compared to the first one, they were also strong. However, they were not, again, just like, although they were better than the first movement, SPLM was not able to, again, have a stable control again in southern Sudan. So there is no evidence that shows that SPLM was able to establish a civilian administration like EPLF did in Eritrea during its armed struggle against Ethiopia, or TPLF did against armed struggle in Tigray against the Ethiopian government. The SPLM was not that much capable in terms of creating popular coalition, mobilization, or trying to create some kind of structure. So we can say that in these long wars, the two long civil wars, both SPLM and Anania were not, capable of, in terms of creating the minimal elements of, structure or centralization or hierarchy in South Sudan. So the idea that South Sudan became an independent state is not because the South Sudan forces wage a strong resistance against successive Sudanese regimes, but there was an internationally brokered agreement between the South Sudanese forces, SPLM, and the Sudanese government, known as the Comprehensive Peace Framework Agreement, that basically charted out the eventual secession of South Sudan. Because of its history, there was no way that South Sudan would stay as part of Sudan because of the history. So as a result, South Sudan became independent in 2011 without having what a modern state is supposed to have. That means the necessary infrastructure, the necessary experience of leading a country on the part of SPLM leaders, or in terms of having some kind of experience of civilian leadership, etc., etc. So because it is a whole 300-page research, so what happened after the country declared independence was it just inherited a country that didn't have the necessary element of element expected of a modern state. It tries to establish a machinery of government almost from the scratch. So the political executive, including the presidency, security apparatus, bureaucracy, it started almost from the scratch and described as neo-patrimonial, weak, informal, and it's always under constant turmoil. You find people in the CPLM, in the government, constantly fighting over power and also go to violence. The bureaucracy lacks the capacity and resources to properly provide critical services. Almost 80% of the country's service is provided by INGOs or IGOs. So that didn't just come from the fact that the leaders were incapable, but because of the history of South Sudan. So the other thing that is very much important as an aspect of post-conflict state building is having social forces such as political parties, media, civil society, trade union, and other social groups contributing to state building. So in South Sudan, political parties, even the space for political parties is very much narrow, and what happens in South Sudan is we have this with the SPLM, the former rebel group, now the leading group dominating the political spectrum. And even in the CPLM, the leading group, what you see is members of a CPLM defecting from this group and establishing their own armed political group. So we have, after the country declared independence in 2011, we have 4 political groups under the name SPLM with defecting from that leading political group and establishing their own political party. And that is not always peaceful, that is always violent. So we expect political parties contributing to state building in terms of mobilizing people, educating them, trying to come up with a policy, common vision, etc., etc. We don't find that in South Sudan. We have also civil societies. Again, the role of civil society is much better in South Sudan because, as I said earlier, 80% of the country's civil service delivery is done by civil society. But this also weakens states because that dimensions, reduces the chance for the state to develop the capacity to provide services. It will depend on INGOs, NGOs, so it will always work at the expense of the state. Again, because of the politics that is inherited from the past, the ethnic relation in South Sudan is very much hostile. You have this Dinka-dominated or Dinka-Nuer-dominated politics in South Sudan, and that is not. Can I have 1 minute? Okay. So it is expected that South Sudan would go to war because it didn't finish its project. The moment it was born, it had unfinished business, particularly with Sudan. Sudan and South Sudan, although the political divorce happened in 2011, have not agreed on so many issues. One is border. 80% of the border between Sudan and South Sudan, they didn't have agreement, and also for instance, this is in 2012, they engaged in actual war after South Sudan seceded from Sudan in 2011. And also there is internal conflict, civil war that started in 2013, continued for about years, and now in 2020 February, they have established a national government of national unity. Also, they have established this. There is no certainty that this will be lasting because of the complicated history. I'm sorry, thank you.
you're not yet done. There's still time for questions.
Yeah.
So questions from the audience and from Zoom. But so where are our cubes? So there's a cube right in front of you, Muhammad. You have a question? And
Yes.
then after Muhammad, we'll come to the Zoom. Oh, Enrique says I should just remind the people on Zoom that they can post questions in the Q&A there. Enrique monitors them and will come to you if there's questions here. But for now, Muhammad.
Thank you very much, Bante, for your nice presentation about the context of South Sudan. My question is, what are the roles of external powers, regional powers, and global powers over the context? The power, I mean, the influence of regional powers and then global powers on the issue. Thank you very much.
Okay. So the role of external actors has been very much important, both in terms of aggravating, exacerbating the crisis, and also contributing to peace, even prior to even the declaration of independence by South Sudan. The SPLM, the former rebel group, today's leading group, has been supported by regional actors such as Ethiopia, Uganda, and also the peace process has been very much supported. The peace process that resulted in the birth of South Sudan has been supported by the United States and other Troika countries, Norway and other countries. After it achieved independence, again, the role of external actors is higher. Uganda has directly involved in the conflict in support of the region, so that also contributed to the conflict. And you have also Machar, where Sudan allegedly supported the SPLM in opposition that is led by Machar. So you have and also there is an interest that there is this South Sudan being a battleground for world powers rivalry, like we have China participating in the oil exploration, we have the United States having interest. So there is always the interest of these actors. Yeah.
I don't know how this works.
So previous question asker, and I forgot to ask people to introduce themselves, was Muhammad Ali is one of our UMAPS scholars. Susan, introduce yourself and ask a question.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm Susan Page, professor at the law school and at the Ford School. Thank you for your presentation. I know that you can't do justice to a long dissertation with very intricate details, but two parts of the question. When you say that the SPLM, or any of the opposition for that matter, was unable to establish stable administration in its areas of control, I agree in terms of the civilian part, because they were still in the military as they were fighting. But do you think that they established control? I mean, they did say, you know, in the liberated areas, whatever that might mean. And then my second question is, given everything that has happened, what needs to happen for state formation to work in, you know, I mean, you could say maybe South Sudan is an outlier because we don't have very many new states coming up, but what are those necessary ingredients for state formation to at least maybe avert this kind of relapse into arms? Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor. So, as based on my readings, based on the authoritative texts of Johnson and others who extensively write about this, there is yes, there is an experience that they had control over some part of territories, but compared to other rebel groups during the time, SPLM was not that strong. Even if it controlled center part of southern Sudan, it was not like effective in terms of establishing civilian administration. It was just they have that military group, fighting groups having control in that area and doing nothing about, you know, the important element of state making. That was the point I was trying to make, and that was also reflected in their incapability of running Southern Sudan, even during the peace period from 2005 all the way to 2011, and also from 2011 until today. Second part of the question is for me, because I'm interested in state formation, state making, this idea of emulating liberal machinery of government that I was trying to make. So what is needed is, in South Sudan, is to establish, to help institutions grow. But what happened since the struggle is NGOs, international non-governmental organizations, or international governmental organizations trying to provide services on behalf of the state, and that has not been helping. It rather is aggravating the situation where South Sudan's no more have the strength, the capacity, the experience needed to run a country, and that's what happened for the last.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you. So as we're out of question time for this presentation, but as our last question asker indicated, this is part of your dissertation research, and I think you just kind of completed your thesis while you were here, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think not the only one of our current cohort who did that during their time at UMAPS. Also, congratulations on that. Thank you.